I don't know how long you want me to go, but I'll keep going, okay? To make things work better for the American people, what institutional change would you make in Washington? Any chance for a current Cora committee? I don't know. And that was the committee to look at the financial system. Right. There has been a committee set up to evaluate how we got into the situation we're in. I did a lot of that work when I was chairman of the Oversight Committee, but there is one that has been set up by law, and it's going to give us a report that will be very helpful. If I had to work a way to institutional change, well, the first thing I would do is I would change the rules in the Senate. They're just unworkable. Any one senator can stop legislation by a threat of a filibuster. The threat of a filibuster, which requires so many hours before you can even get the votes. Even if you have the 60 votes, you can't get there. And that would be a change that I think ought to be made. And the other change that I would make is to have public funding of campaigns. I think private funding of these campaigns has a corrupting influence. Do you think there is still the energy to pass a climate change bill? If not, is there the will for a bill to be introduced next term if it fails? Well, we don't need a bill for this next year. We're in 2-year sessions. So our bill has passed the House. It's pending in the Senate. It has not been moved forward in a vigorous way, partly because of the health bill, partly because it's a difficult bill to pass, and we need the full concentration of a broad group of senators. I'm hopeful that we'll have bipartisan support in the Senate, thanks to Senator Lindsey Graham, who has understood this is something we must address. He has told me that he's willing to accept the President's goals and timetable and numbers, which are based on our bill. And he wants greater emphasis on nuclear energy. Nuclear energy will be one of the ways that the cleaner energy can be accomplished. But we don't dictate the results. We dictate the market and the goals and the incentives. And we try to allow a transition to a carbon-free electricity and in the transportation sector in our legislation. I'm hopeful that we can get it passed. I would have liked Copenhagen, and I did attend the meeting in Copenhagen, to have been stronger than it was. But I must tell you this, when I got to Copenhagen, it was a disaster. For a lot of different reasons, the bringing together of all the countries in the world to come up with a plan to reduce carbon emissions was not getting us anywhere until President Obama showed up. He spoke on the next to the last day, what was supposed to have been the last day. He gave a speech and said, let's get moving on this. He didn't just give a good speech. He then stayed in Copenhagen and worked for 11 straight hours to get the agreement that the parties signed up onto. And it kept the process alive, it kept it going, and it accomplished some important goals because China was the biggest difficulty at the conference. They were hiding behind the developing countries, and because they didn't want to agree to timetables and any verification that they were achieving the goals of carbon reduction. Well, we got them as well to sign on to an agreement that we're going to have definite, clear goals that will have to be verifiable, and that will be part of our international efforts. But the biggest way to get the international agreement, which we had hoped we would have had by Copenhagen, would have been had we developed the legislation and passed it into law so we could show that the United States was the leader, not the denier of global warming, which is what we had from President Bush. How can we overcome the obstruction tactics of the Republicans? Well, we're doing the best we can. But for those who say that we should fight the battle and not give in, not compromise, I could just only say that we're going to lose some seats in 2010. I don't think we're going to lose as many as people are predicting, but it always happens that the president loses seats for his party in the first non-presidential election, if for no other reason that you don't get the turnout of young people and minorities that vote in presidential elections and working people. We'll do our best to get them out in the districts where there is a fight, but it's harder in those years to get them out. But I think if we achieve the goals of legislation and the economy starts turning around, and President Obama, one of the most eloquent men that I've ever dealt with and seen, can articulate to the American people, we inherited this mess. I'm always amazed, by the way, when I hear two things from the Republicans. We didn't have this deficit until Obama became president. Where did the deficit come from? They passed bills without funding any of them. They passed the Medicare prescription drug benefit, didn't pay for it. They funded wars, and we didn't pay for it. They funded tax breaks for the rich. We didn't pay for it. All of that was added to the deficit. And the other thing is they argue this TARP program, the Troubled Assets Relief Program, why, that's the cause of the Democratic Party. Well, that was what was proposed by President Bush and his Secretary of the Treasury and Bernanke, who was the president of the Fed. Many of us voted for it because we were about to go off a cliff. We didn't like it, but it didn't come from us. And it's so irresponsible when you get the statements that are so untrue being made. Politics is another thing we ought to recognize should be for the elections. Not all the time. Politics, campaigns should be for during the campaign period, not the constant campaign that's not in the interest of the country.
Well, that's our program for this evening. I want to thank our guests, Carole Lutness and Steve Bennett, for taking the time to come on the show, and our entire crew for making the coverage of Congressman Waxman's event a reality. Again, if you have comments or want to know more about this subject or any past programs, please feel free to contact us at ConnejoDemocrats.com or eyeontheissues@AOL.com. So until next time, be safe, stay well, and keep your eye on the issues.